Hello everybody, welcome back from Spring Break 2020. I hope you had a wonderful and relaxing spring break given the predicament that we are all in. I'm sure it wasn't the ideal spring break that we were all looking forward to and expecting. I'm just here to give you guys a little bit of a background, give you some introduction to Charles Darwin, who he was, and what his theory of evolution is all about. I feel it was kind of unfair that we kind of dove right in to this unit without giving some of this preliminary background information. So I kind of want to take a step back, give you guys some information, and hopefully this will start to make this unit make a lot more sense as we move forward. So to start us off, we got to first off define what a theory is. So this is Darwin's theory of evolution. In a lot of ways, I'm sure many of you are thinking that a theory is just something predictable or a kind of like a hypothesis. I have a theory about that. Well, in science, theory is not the common language use of theory. Theory is actually what comes at the end of our scientific method. So we all have to think back to August when we first met each other, and we had the scientific method on the board: OQ-hetic, observation, question, hypothesis, experiment, data analysis, and then conclusion. A theory is enough scientists draw the same conclusion as to why something is happening, and then it becomes a scientific theory. So a theory is actually a well-tested explanation based upon an insurmountable amount of evidence. So a theory isn't such a common language use that you're probably thinking of when it comes to science. So when we're talking about Darwin's theory of evolution, there's a tremendous amount of evidence to back this up as to why this is happening. The other thing that you're probably thinking of is a scientific law. A theory is not a law. A law is something that we can actually state what is happening. So if I drop this, we see that the law of gravity is in place, as there's a gravitational pull causing all objects to drop at that same rate of 9.81 meters per second. So when Darwin had his theory of evolution, we need to next define what evolution is. And at its simplest, evolution is change over time. So here I have the evolution of the iPod. When I was a teenager, when I was growing up, this was the equivalent of the iPod back in its day. This is a Sony Walkman. So this is what I used to have all throughout middle school. You push this open, you pop it open, you throw a CD in there, you throw your headphones on the side, and you could carry this around in your pocket if you were lucky by squeezing it in. It's huge, it's bulky, it's massive. You can only listen to one CD at a time. So Apple completely changed the industry when they unveiled the iPod. The iPod came out, and now we can have multiple CDs in one device on the go. And then as we go from year to year or generation to generation, the iPod got better. We could have more music. Now we have color. It has a larger battery life. So as we move throughout time, the iPod improved. So what I'm getting at here is this is evolution. It works very similar in the animal kingdom. In this one, it was bulky. It had a very short battery life. It was gray screen. These weren't desirable traits. We didn't like the fact that we couldn't have more of our music on this device. We wanted to have more memory. We didn't like the fact that it wasn't in color. I couldn't put images on there. I couldn't put my CD cover art in this device. So the next generation would come out, more memory. Now it has color. Now I could put in pictures. So the successful and desirable traits, they continued on throughout time. The traits that weren't so good, weren't popular, people didn't like them, they died off. So eventually we're getting better and better and better. Same thing goes with animals. They are better and better and better from generation to generation because they are then more suitable or adapted to their environment. So evolution has changed over time. We defined theory and we defined evolution. So this is Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was a naturalist. And as a naturalist, he would go out and he would explore and study nature. The reason why I have Snoopy right here is because Snoopy is a beagle. And Charles Darwin, on his expedition or his journey, he rode on the ship HMS Beagle, which is Her Majesty's ship, the Beagle. So it was funded by the Queen. And so he left in December of 1831, and he traveled around the world, literally. So he came down, tip of South America, stopped in the Galapagos. That's where he did a lot of his research and a lot of his evidence to support or back his theory came from the Galapagos Islands. He came back down the tip of Africa and eventually made his way back to Plymouth, where he originally departed. So 1831 he departed, 1836 he returned. So this is a very, very long voyage, very long journey. A little bit more about Charles Darwin. He was born February 12th, 1809. He was married to Emma Darwin. Darwin, notice that the name is the same. That is actually his first cousin. So there was a more acceptable rate of incest or marrying within the family back in the 1800s than it obviously is now. He originally was not interested at all in exploring nature or geology. He wanted to become a doctor. So he went to the University of Edinburgh, which was a medical school, and then later he began his studies and his love for nature and geology. So within his 5-year voyage on the HMS Beagle, he traveled to 16 different locations, and what he would do, he'd get off the ship, he'd grab specimens, bring them back on the ship, he would sketch in his notebook, take all sorts of data, some measurements. This was just kind of his norm for the span of 5 years. Like I mentioned before, his major findings were on the Galapagos Island. And on the Galapagos Island, he found different species, including finches, tortoises, iguanas, what we call blue-footed boobies, which are birds, and then a Sally light-footed crabs. And so within these different islands on the Galapagos, he noticed that their animals were similar, but yet they were still different. They were different species. So the birds, the finches, would have different shaped beaks as he went from island to island. Or the tortoises, he noticed that they would have different shapes of necks. Some would have short necks, some would have long necks, and yet they were still all tortoises. And so by seeing all these differences between the animals, that led him to come up with the theory of evolution. So what the theory of evolution is all about, here we have this meme which comes from actually your textbook. This is one of the questions in your textbook. It says the diagram below best illustrates A, Lamarck's theory of evolution, B, Darwin's theory of evolution, C, Malthus's principles, or D, Lyell's theory about past changes. And then we have a student come along, scratches all those answers out, and he says E, giraffes are heartless creatures. Obviously that's not the correct answer. The correct answer is B, Darwin's theory of evolution. So here we have two long-necked giraffes and a short-necked giraffe. And we see that the short-necked giraffe is eventually dying off. So the short-necked giraffe does not have access to the food or the resources that it needs in order to survive. So this diagram shows time changing. So this would be A, B, C, for example. So this giraffe, this short-necked giraffe, was not adapted or suited for its environment. So most likely this did not grow up in order to have offspring or pass its trait for a short neck onto the remaining generations. And because that did not occur, the short-necked giraffe is probably not going to survive or be around and present in the next generation. Those that are long-necked, they are better suited for their environment, which means that they're more likely to grow up and pass their trait on to the next generation. And so eventually over time, if this environment stays the same, where all the resources, all the food are up in the trees, over time all the animals are going to have to be able to gain access to that resource. So we're going to eventually see that that whole area is going to be made up of tall, long-necked giraffes because they are best suited for their environment. So that's really what Darwin's theory of evolution is all about. It's that those who are best suited for and best adapted to their environment will survive. And their traits are going to be passed on to the next generation. And that's going to make that generation better suited for and adapted for their environment. So let's look at this one. So we got Patrick, and he's talking about taking the caution and warning labels off of all the products and let natural selection begin. So natural selection is nature is actually selecting who lives and who dies. So within natural selection we have winners and we have losers. So the winners are those who are best suited for their environment. In this scenario, it's the long-necked giraffes. They're the winners. They're the ones that are going to live long enough to pass their traits on to the next generation. The losers are the short-necked giraffes. They're not going to be able to survive and pass their traits on to the next generation. So every year there's what's called the Darwin Awards. And the Darwin Awards are awarded to somebody who died doing something stupid. So I don't know if it's actually true that this guy won it, but he probably should have. This guy was a cast member. He was playing Gaston at Disney World. So on a July 4th party, he thought it would be really funny if he grabbed the mortar or the firework and lighted it off from his head. That ended up killing him. So when we're talking about this, we're saying that those traits that he had, his intelligence, would not be passed on to the next generation. So that's why they call it the Darwin Awards, because nature is selecting them out of the gene pool. There's several different award recipients. Somebody died by throwing a concrete block against a plexiglass. The plexiglass obviously rebounded the center block back onto the guy, crushed him and killed him. Another guy was trying to siphon gas out of an RV and he ended up hooking it up to the sewage. So unfortunately, they died while doing stupid things. So hopefully that helps solidify in your minds who Charles Darwin was, what theory is, what evolution is, and what his big ideas really are all about. As we move forward, there's going to continually be assignments and videos, questions to answer. I'm going to see if I can try and get the virtual meetings up and running. So be on the lookout for that. If you have any questions, please, I can't stress this enough, do email me, do text me. You can put questions right on Google Classroom on the discussion post or the assignments themselves. I'll see that. You could also email me. There's multiple ways to get a hold of me. So if you do need help or you are confused about anything or you just want to talk, I am here. So for that, I'm going to sign out. I hope to see and hear from you soon. I hope you are all staying positive. Obviously not COVID-19 positive, but staying positive nonetheless. Take care. I'll see you guys soon.